You're listening to the CatholicHTowner podcast. I dedicate this episode in honor of 2 Peter, chapter 1, verse 16. For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of His majesty. Hello and welcome to the CatholicHTowner podcast, come to you from the Bayou City in the state everyone is moving to. The podcast where evangelizing and catechizing both get Texas-sized personalities. I'm your host, the CatholicHTowner, self-proclaimed theology geek, massive foodie, and nemesis to all things activist. Thank you for listening. It's hard to imagine, based on the opening alone I just did, but I've been back in the Catholic Church for almost 20 years. And what a journey it's been for me. It's taken me from a hole-in-the-wall church to an international Catholic brotherhood to a believing Catholic university that was about, I'd say, 98% free of any liberalism, to a different U.S. state, and right back to my home, all in the same time frame. Of course, when one has been involved with something for close to 20 years, one tends to get a little reflective, which is what happened to me and what led to this episode. You see, when I first returned, I wanted to share my faith with others, as one wants to do with something that brings you joy. But oh, the objections and the wrath I encountered in sharing my faith with other people back then. It was while reflecting on these interactions and doing further research, and by that I mean watching YouTube videos about why people reject God, religion, and in particular Catholicism, I've come to this conclusion. It's not that I disagree with everything they say. No, if this were just a simple disagreement, I would just point out why everything they said is wrong and then just leave it at that. No, that's not what eats at me. What eats at me is the same arguments used over and over with little or no variation. Now, while that is what eats at me, that's not the funniest part. No, the funniest part is when the argument comes up, I refute it, then the person acts like I shouldn't have known how to refute it. It's like each one of them is saying, how come he destroyed it so fast? I the bright, not the dumb Christian. In all seriousness, further examination shows it all comes down to the same 10 arguments, and I'm sick of hearing all of them. So for this episode and the next one, I'm going to spotlight 10 arguments in particular. Why, in my view, none of them work, and a challenge to those who do think that they're true. Maybe you, the believer, too, have heard these before, or perhaps you haven't. Maybe you were taken off guard when they were brought up and didn't know how to respond. Regardless, these, in my view, are the first 5 of the top 10 arguments I, as a believer, am sick of hearing, some objections, and a challenge to anyone who does believe them. Starting with myth number 10. We're both atheists when it comes to other gods. I, the atheist, just go one step further. Oh, spare me. If the number of gods you believe in is greater than 0, then you're not an atheist. It doesn't matter with whom you disagree. It doesn't matter what you don't believe. What matters is the amount you believe. If I, the Christian, for example, say I believe there is one God, then that one is greater than 0. Thus, I'm not an atheist. In this case, whoever is claiming that the Christian and the actual atheist are both atheists is making an unreasonable claim a Christian should count as an atheist, even though Christianity is not a form of atheism and has never been considered one. I've even heard 2 variations of this with similar rebuttals. The first one being, quote, when it comes to other beliefs, you don't believe in them, so you're an atheist when it comes to them, end quote. No. A, the number of beliefs I have is not 0, so I'm still not an atheist, and B, every definition of the word atheist concerns God's existence, not the concept of belief in general. The second variation goes like this, quote, I contend that we are both atheists. I just believe in one fewer God than you do. When you understand why you dismiss all the other possible gods, you will understand why I dismiss yours. End quote. Actually, no, I still don't understand. First off, Up until now, I never gave the reasons why I don't believe in all these other so-called gods. So no, I don't understand why you dismiss mine. Second, and this begs the good question, do you know why I don't believe in Zeus or Thor, or why I don't even believe in the flying spaghetti monster? It's not just because two of these have been dismissed as myth, and the last one has been ruled as not legit by several courts. It's not just because people who bring these up don't believe in these so-called gods' existence in the first place. And let's face it, Pastafarians, you don't believe in the flying spaghetti monster either. Don't try to convince me otherwise. No, it all comes down to two particular reasons. Reason 1. The historical evidence for Zeus or Thor or the flying spaghetti monster is 0. There might be evidence showing people believed in them at one point in world history, but that's not the same as having actual historical proof of these so-called gods. But the historical evidence for Jesus and for the events in the Bible? Plentiful. Reason number 2, it doesn't answer the main point, which is whether God exists or not. This whole argument is like someone claiming that there's a fruit in existence called a satsuma, someone else finding that ridiculous because Satsuma is the name of a city, and trying to dismiss it by asking why can't we name vegetables after cities. As a foodie, I can vouch for the fact we do have vegetables named after cities. Vidalia onions, for example. But even if that weren't true, it doesn't answer whether Satsuma fruits exist. Which they do. But I said this one has a challenge, and here's my challenge on this. Explain to me how, in any scenario, lack of belief in many should equal belief in none. Find me any scenario where that's true. Speaking of belief, that fits neatly into myth number 9. Gods of the past turned out to be false, so the God of the Bible must be false. Before considering the myth proper, let's first consider this mental quandary. Take a quarter, flip it in the air, and call it. For argument's sake, let's suppose it landed heads. You flip the coin again and it comes up tails. You flip it again and it comes up heads. Here's my question. If you flip it the 4th time, can we say for sure it will land tails? The correct answer is no. You don't know that for a fact because the past flips don't change your overall odds. How it's going to flip the next time is independent of and has no bearing on the odds of this current flip because the odds don't change. Let's take this one step further and move from a coin to a die. And let's say it's a standard 6-sided one. If it comes up as 2, 3, and 5 on 3 rolls, can we then say the next roll will definitely be a 4? Again, the answer is no. Each roll was independent of the other one, and the odds are still 1 in 6 that you'll come up with a particular number. Now apply this idea to the myth. Just as it is foolish to claim the next coin flip or dice roll based on past results, just as it is foolish to make an assertion of the next coin flip or dice roll based on past results alone, it is equally foolish to think that just because some so-called deity was made up, that means the God of the Bible is made up. Along those lines, there's another weird notion out there that belief in only one God came from, evolved, if you will, from the belief of many gods. There's one big problem with this idea. There is no anthropological or sociological evidence for that. And I used the word evolved here for a reason. It was speculated years ago that much like how humans evolved from less advanced animals, so too does religion evolve. But with religion, it was speculated years ago that much like how humans evolved from less advanced animals, so too does religion evolve. But with religion, the evolutionary process goes from polytheistic to monotheistic to atheistic. Yet, in the historical evidence, we see no such evolutionary progression. We may find greater understanding of the religion within its own religious framework, but we don't see anything coming from polytheistic beliefs or anything hinting at the religion becoming atheistic. All beliefs in many gods does is beget belief in other multiple gods. See ancient Greece to ancient Rome, for example. We should also find it strange that throughout human history there has been only one group who believed in just one god. At the same time, these supposed gods were worshipped, and that group was the Hebrews. Even then, we don't say Christianity is the evolved form of Judaism. We say Christianity is the fulfillment of the promises found in Judaism. See, for example, the prophet Micah, writing that a day will come when God's name will be great among all peoples, among all nations. Here's my challenge for those who believe in this myth. Read through the mythology of any ancient civilization's god pantheon. Pick one of the gods, then tell me their origin story. Now read through the beginning of Genesis and tell me what the God of the Bible's origin is. It should take you no time at all to figure out the challenge is the trick question. The Bible doesn't say what God's origins are. It's based on the assumption God has always been here. And that's the major difference. But on to myth number 8. You only have the belief system you have because of where you were born. A variation of this argument goes like this. You're a Christian because you were born in America. If you were born in India, you'd be Hindu. If you were born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be Muslim. Ladies and gentlemen, and there are no others, this is what you call a genetic fallacy, an illogical argument for or against an idea based on the origin of the idea. In this instance, we are led to believe that we should question or doubt a belief just because of its geographical origins. Ignoring for a moment, this doesn't answer whether God exists or not. It also ignores the fact no country or society exists based on atheism, and geography has no bearing on this point. If geography had anything to do with it, then I, someone born in America and have lived in America all my life, shouldn't have changed my faith at any point in life. Yet I have changed my religious stance 3 times. The idea of the religion you have being based on where you were born might have been true and may have made more sense if we were talking about the 1950s or earlier, when the world was more isolated and immigration wasn't that big an issue. But here in the 21st century, it makes little to no sense. It makes even less sense since conversions to other faiths happen all the time and may occur in the same country. Furthermore, several countries can and do have more than one faith within their borders. India was brought up earlier. While it's true most Indian citizens are Hindu, Christians and Muslims live there too. Israel has 3 religions within their borders. So how are we supposed to make an assumption of what their religion is? Besides, how does this explain the various diasporas in world history, be it Indian, Mexican, Jewish, and so forth? It can't explain it. I doubt it was ever even considered. For that matter, am I alone in thinking that there's a drop of imperialism, racism, and snobbery in the statement, you only have the belief system you have because of where you were born? Notice no European country is ever brought up when this argument is used. And therein lies my challenge. It is a mental scenario. An American family is in the military and is shipped overseas. While living in this other country, they become parents and their child is born while they're overseas on an American military base. If your belief system is based off of where you were born, what religion is the child? Now on to myth number 7. Religion is responsible for most wars. The thinking behind this one goes like this. Critics of religion would say that if religion was so wonderful and so beneficial to humanity, then why does it cause so much violence and conflict? This is one of those ideas that sounds damning until you take a closer look at it. At best, religion is only responsible for maybe 7% of wars in recorded history, making it the least likely cause, not the most likely. That was the conclusion of the book Encyclopedia of Wars by Charles Phillips and Alan Axelrod. Out of the 7% of religious-caused wars, according to their findings, most were caused not by Christianity, but by Islam. Well, I can see how that might be a strike against Islam, but I can't see how Islam is representative of every religion. And I'll bet no one can come up with any war example that either had another explanation, had nothing to do with religion, or is part of the 7%. In fact, let's try that experiment now, shall we? Let's come up with some wars here and see if they had anything to do with religion. American Revolution? Nothing to do with religion. War of 1812? Same thing there, nothing to do with religion. American Civil War? That's a no too. In fact, the only war America has been involved with any religious connotations was the War on Terror. But even if that did count, that's maybe one out of how many grand total? Now wait, maybe this is not being fair here. I mean, after all, that's just America. What about the rest of the world? We'll come back to America in a moment because there's another point I want to make, but for now, yes, let's look at the rest of the world. What about the infamous Troubles in Northern Ireland? That's a little closer, but it was actually over whether Ireland should stay part of the United Kingdom. Religion did play somewhat of a role, but that was not until much, much later. How about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? That's more an ethnic war than a religious war. World War I? Not started over religion. World War II? Not over religion either. Now, some may object to me saying that World War II was not about religion because the Nazis targeted Jewish people. I would like to point out that we're talking about whether religion was the primary cause of World War II, which it wasn't. We could go a little bit more into whether the targets of the Nazis had anything to do with the war or faith, but that's another episode. Moving on. The current Ukraine-Russian conflict? Well, I don't know what caused that war, and honestly, I don't think anyone does, but I've never heard anyone say it's over religion. But, fine, let's give this idea the benefit of the doubt, because I put this off for long enough. What about the Crusades? That was started as a war of religion. Religion was the primary cause, and it stayed that way throughout the conflict. You may think that critics have me on this one, but they don't. Speculation exists as to whether it was Christianity or Islam that started the Crusades, but whether it was one or the other is not the point. Here's the point. I said 7% of wars were over religion. This one is part of the 7%, so it doesn't refute anything. As a final thought, I had mentioned there was another point I wanted to make about America involving whether religion caused most wars or not, and here's my other point about. Also, consider this for a moment, since I said there was another point about America and war I wanted to bring up. If religion was such a major factor on how frequently wars happen, then America, given the amount of time it's been in existence, should be one of the most war-thirsty nations in the world. It's not. It's the opposite. And here's my challenge about this myth. Show me any credible statistical evidence that refutes the numbers I gave you here, and show me the evidence that does show it. And here's my challenge concerning this. Show me any credible statistical evidence that refutes the numbers I just gave you here. And speaking of myths with credibility problems, myth number 6. Jesus is a myth / composite of other figures. The thinking behind this myth can be summarized as the following. Jesus isn't real, Since he's not real, then nothing he said or did in the Gospels is important, and since it's not important, there's no need for me to imitate him or believe anything that was said about him in any way, shape, or form. This has a short response and a long answer to it. Let's start off with the short answer. Jesus Christ of Nazareth, Messiah and Savior, is a real historical person. Period. The notion that he is a myth is taken about as seriously by historians as biologists take creationism. The long response involves a brief history of where this idea came from. As far as I can tell, the idea of Christ being a myth was first proposed by French thinker Charles-François Dupuy. And what did he use as the basis for his conclusion? He thought that because some elements in the Gospels and other parts of the Bible sound very similar to other stories, then the Gospels must be copies of these other accounts, thus they are not real. More on this idea in the next episode, but one important thing to keep in mind here. Dupuy was not a biblical scholar. In fact, he had no background in biblical or theological studies whatsoever. From what little evidence I can find on him and on his research, as far as I'm concerned, he just made this whole thing up. This would be laughable if there weren't so many secularists who believe this nowadays, especially in that joke of a documentary called Zeitgeist. The idea of Christ as myth didn't catch on at first, but gained traction after the publication of a book called The World's 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves. Graves' work has also been dismissed for its factual and historical inaccuracies. Maybe if there's interest about this, I'll probably make a whole video series pointing out every single thing wrong with what Graves says, but the fact that some consider 16 crucified saviors the bedrock for why they don't believe in Jesus tells you all you need to know about what little research they do. And here's my challenge if you think Christ is a myth. Provide me the name of any credible Egyptologist that can confirm and prove line by line Jesus, as written in the Gospels, ripped off the myth of the Egyptian god Horus. I will guarantee you dollars to breakfast tacos you will not come up with anybody. And with this last challenge, that brings us to the end of part 1. Join me next time for the top 5 notions that I'm sick of hearing. Until next time, y'all. Hi everyone, thank you for listening to my podcast. Follow me on Twitter, Getter, visit my YouTube channel, my Rumble page, my Patreon, and visit my website at CatholicHTowner-podcast.castos.com.